Hi guys! Okay, now we're back. Now we're here with the first part of our series, and that is to talk about how to qualify for an IEP. So the first step is to understand what an IEP actually is. An IEP is an individualized education program. In some states, they would call it an individualized education plan. Now, it's a specific plan. It's a document, a legal binding document for a student with a disability. It's used for students ages 3 to 21 or 22, depending on your state. Some states it's 21, some states it's 22. And students are able to receive services to help them. Now, this is really important. If a student has a disability, if they're not learning at the same pace, if they just have a little bit of gaps, or they have an emotional need or a physical need that is inhibiting their learning, that's the key. It has to inhibit their learning, their growth, and their academic achievement at school. If this is happening, then they'll be able to get an IEP. Now, that IEP is then, it is signed by a team. You go over it. It's a document which we'll talk about in the second part of our series. And that document is to follow that student. It lays out exactly what they need, what accommodations, what they're working on, what their goals are in order to catch up or to make progress in some way. The document gets reviewed every year. Sometimes it gets added to, sometimes it might stay the same because they haven't made a lot of progress. And we can talk about that in the next part. But now we are going to talk about how to qualify. Now, in the United States of America, there are 13 disability categories that a child can fall into. Before a child gets diagnosed with a disability, they have to have some sort of evaluation. Now, usually what this looks like is a little 6-year-old boy named Tommy will walk into his kindergarten classroom. His teacher might notice something's not looking right. He's not sitting still. He's not making the progress that the other kids are making in her kindergarten class. And she might request that this child receive a screening. This might be the speech and language pathologist. They might come in and just do a quick little screen, take a look at the student and see if there are any speech delays. The occupational therapist that works on fine motor and sensory, they might come in and take a little look and do a screening. And based on those screenings from physical therapist, counselor, whatever, they may bring together a meeting. This can also be done on the phone. And what they need to do is they need to get consent from the parents to do an actual evaluation. Now, an evaluation for speech, OT, counseling or mental health or psychiatry, and even an academic evaluation of some sort or a test to look at the academic skills that student has. All of those different evaluations have different tests. And they come up with different scores, and it'll lay out the student's strengths and the student's needs. These evaluations need to be brought to the table. The parents need to hear them. They need to read them. Parents should receive the evaluations to go over them. And a lot of times those evaluations will come to a conclusion. So the speech and language pathologist might come to the conclusion that, hey, this 6-year-old is not speaking or articulating or understanding language in the same way that their regular developing peers are. And because I'm a professional speech and language, I might suggest, hey, this child might need some speech therapy. Or the occupational therapist might have an evaluation and realize that that child has a lot of sensory needs. And based on their professional opinion, they will suggest an occupational therapy time and certain amount of hours or minutes that the student will see them per week. Same goes for the physical therapist. Same goes for the special educator who's going to come in and check in on that student. So all these evaluations are going to come together and they're going to suggest that this child might need some services. Now these are all important evaluations, but they're a little bit auxiliary in comparison to the main evaluation, which is usually a neuropsych eval or a neuropsych evaluation that's going to diagnose the child. Now, some parents, you might have known that your child has had autism since the age of 3 when their pediatrician sent you to a developmental pediatrician, and that developmental pediatrician gave you a diagnosis. Now, those are really important things to have if you have a medical diagnosis of some kind, but what the schools are looking for is how it's impacting school, because a student could have autism but be keeping up socially, academically, really not have any needs, and they might not qualify for an IEP. So the evaluation that gets done by a school psychologist or somebody is going to determine the exact category for the school in order to diagnose the student and qualify them for an IEP. The student gets one of the 13 disability categories. Now, they have to fall within one of the 13 in order to qualify for an IEP. Now, here are the categories. I always miss one, so I'm going to read them all from a list so that I don't get anything wrong and give you any wrong information. Here they are: autism, deaf blindness, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, specific learning disability, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, visual impairment. Now, those are a lot. Those are 13, and they're all kind of confusing. So most of them are self-explanatory, and if you need more information, I would research the specific disabilities. I'm not going to go into each of them because that's a whole college course that we could go into. But look at one, and you can do all your research that you'd like to do on that specific disability. So, say you have a student. We'll talk about Tommy, for example. And Tommy, the little 6-year-old who walked into kindergarten, whose speech was a little bit delayed, he might qualify for a speech and language impairment. Does that mean that he has a stamp on his permanent record that he has a disability for the rest of his life and he is never going to change? No. It means that currently, at this very moment, he has a speech and language impairment. And you know what? Some people might say, that's so bad. He's 6. We're diagnosing him so early with something sad. I get that, and we can have differing views on that. But the main thing is that he does need help with his speech. And the way to get that help is to have a diagnosis from a school to get an IEP. So it's kind of a rough system that you kind of need it in order to get the help. Does that make sense? Anyway, there are a lot of views on this, so I just want to clear it up. Actually, that student might only need the IEP for one goal. They might only need speech, right? But some people might have autism, and they might have that as their primary diagnosis for their IEP. What that means is they might need help in a lot of areas. Autism covers a broad spectrum of abilities and symptoms and different things like that. So they might need speech. They might also have a sensory challenge and need OT, occupational therapy. They might also need some social skill. They might need the social worker or the counselor. They might also need physical therapy because some of their gross motor skills are a little delayed. I mean, it's a broad spectrum. You might need one thing, you might need 5. So once they have that diagnosis, then it's much easier for the school system to go back and to start drafting a document that's going to be very tailor specific to that student. The blog post is also going to have a PDF attached that just is a 1-page quick facts information about how to qualify for an IEP that you can easily print and go back to again and again. So I hope that this was helpful for teachers, for parents, for students. Stay tuned for part 2, where we talk about exactly how to write it and exactly what to look for in an IEP. Thanks.